Today we're going to be installing a slip-on aftermarket exhaust for a 2006 CBR1000RR. Even though our sample bike is a Honda CBR, it's pretty much similar for most sport bikes. Basically get everything out of your way, take off the old one, put on the new one, reinstall everything. Very first thing you need to do is make sure your bike runs correctly prior to installing the exhaust. So I already ran this one, there's no engine lights or anything, it's all working correctly. At this point the fumes have all cleared out, so I'm not going to restart it up for the video. But make sure you do that, otherwise if an engine light comes on after you do this, it'll help eliminate whether it was something that you changed on the bike or if it was something that was already a problem. Once you're confident the bike runs correctly on its own, you get your slip-on. In this case I'm going with a Scorpion, and then you're ready to install. So let's get to it.
Begin by unpacking your slip-on exhaust to see if there's any installation directions specific to your exhaust or bike model. For motorcycles with an exhaust valve like this one has, you want to remove the cabling that goes to that exhaust valve first, or else you won't be able to remove your slip-on later. This can be a little bit tricky and take some time, so don't worry if you're struggling to get this done. After loosening the cabling, start removing items that are in the way of getting to the side bolts on your exhaust. For most bikes, that includes removing the rear foot pegs and loosening up the front ones, and possibly removing some heat shields like we're doing here. Loosen the mid-pipe clamp and then remove the seat and the rear cowl from the motorcycle. With these out of the way, we can start removing some of the brackets and trim pieces that surround the factory exhaust. Next, we loosen the two bolts that hold the exhaust into place. Beyond this, it's going to be a matter of trying to wiggle it out of position and remove everything else that's going to be standing in our way or causes it to catch, preventing us from sliding it out. For me, this meant farther loosening the solenoid cables that came off of the exhaust valve, as well as removing the rear license plate bracket. I also loosened one more V-clamp on the exhaust at the next junction up to give it a little more flex. This will give it just enough wiggle room that we can finally take it off. Having finally removed the exhaust itself, the next step is removing the factory heat shield. This is much more simple to do than removing the bulk of the muffler. Once you get the fasteners for this loosened, it should pop right off. Make sure you remove the factory exhaust clamps as well that you'll be replacing down the line. Next, we're trimming the adhesive heat shield that we're going to replace the factory heat shield with. If your exhaust also requires this, they should have a template that's included with the slip-on. With the pieces cut, we first dry fit them to make sure everything lines up correctly, then remove the adhesive backer and apply these permanently.
Now I'm at the point that the new exhaust is ready to go on, but one of the biggest benefits of putting a slip-on exhaust, especially if you're coming from a factory system, is the weight reduction. So I have gone ahead and purchased this scale, and I'm going to try to weigh everything before I put it on, and then at the end I'm going to weigh everything I took off to try to get a rough difference of how much poundage that this will actually save you. I already did put the little heat shield adhesive on, so I'm going to just weigh what's left, but it's really, really light. So all of this is, half an ounce it's saying. So based on that, I would say there's maybe, and this is a huge maybe, an ounce of the adhesive and heat shield on there. Next is for the actual muffler itself. 3 pounds, 7.5 ounces for that. And then the mid pipe that I just covered with my fingerprints is 1 pound, 5.9 ounces. We're gonna have all the miscellaneous hardware and brackets that are gonna be used to install the new exhaust. So with all the odds and ends, it's 1 pound and 0.3 ounces. Now that we're done weighing all these parts, let's actually get them installed.
After slipping on the mid-pipe, I'm removing all of the protective coating that's applied with the aftermarket exhaust bracket. Then I'm fitting in the rubber liner that goes in to protect the muffler from scraping against the bracket. Make sure the new band clamps are slipped onto the mid-pipe, then you can install the rear muffler. To get the muffler into its final position, it's going to be a lot of guess and check of adjusting the bracket, the mid-pipe, the muffler, and the clamps to try to make sure everything lines up how you want it to. Make sure you take your time to get this right and get it as close to where you want it as possible. Otherwise, this is going to be something that drives you nuts every single time you approach your motorcycle. You will see this every time you ride.
Now I got the exhaust on and lined it up as best as I reasonably could. When you're trying to line it up, only worry about the brackets here on the edge that are supporting the exhaust. Don't worry about the clamps yet. Get it wherever you want, and then once you tighten down those two bolts, this is going to hold really well. It's not really going to move when you're just in the mid-pipe. So after that's done, and only after that's done, you come up and then you can tighten these two little band clamps. If all you're doing is the exhaust install, you can go ahead and put the bike back together at this point, but I would recommend starting it up and making sure there's no issues or any exhaust leaks prior to doing that. I'm going to start this up right now, make sure I don't have any lights on. I got to open the door to do it, obviously. Before I put my bike back together though, I'm also going to get rid of the servo motor that controls these cables for that exhaust valve. That's CBR specific. I'm going to do a separate video for that. I'll link that in the description below. In the meantime, let's start this up and then I'm going to resume the video after I delete that. bike's running good. I had no lights come on, which is also a good sign, and that is a hell of a lot louder than the factory exhaust. I'm gonna resume after I do that solenoid delete. At this point, our servo delete is now installed. I got all the excess hardware for that out of the way. Let's get everything else put back together.
At this point, it's a matter of reinstalling everything in the reverse order that you took it off. If you're the type of person who can't remember what hardware went where when you were uninstalling everything, it really helps to have pictures of everything on hand that you can go back and cross-check now. I want to note that I didn't like the look of those silver side plates after I fit tested my rear cowl, so now I'm going back to remove those to clean up the tail end look a little bit. I also decided to do a small adjustment to the exhaust position again so it would line up a little bit better with the rear cowl assembled. After finishing the adjustment, I once again go back and reinstall both sets of foot pegs, the heat shield, and then move on from there. In a moment, what you'll see me struggle with is that I forgot what place of grommet was supposed to be located on one of these panels. As you can see, I uninstalled the hardware a few different times and tried it in both orientations to try to figure out which way was correct. This is where having pictures of everything before you disassemble it really comes in handy, and what I found was, even though I had the video, I didn't get a close enough shot to really depict which area had the original hardware locations. Now as I finish getting everything reassembled, I'm going to display all the weights of the items that we took off of the bike. Those weights are going to be shown now. If you recall from earlier, these are the weights of everything we added back on. Now taking the difference between the two, here is the total weight savings of the new exhaust. It's not much, but at least it sounds a hell of a lot better. Thanks for watching.